with the presentation. Okay? Great. So first of all, it's a pleasure to be here tonight to talk about this consciousness, which was called Albert Schweitzer in his last life. I will talk very shortly about his biography, and then I will try to go very briefly into a conscientiometric analysis of Albert Schweitzer. So the conscientiometric analysis is based on the conscientiogram. I think all of you are familiar with the conscientiogram. You know how it works with the 2,000 questions and so on. So this is why I don't go into the structure of the conscientiogram. I did not the complete conscientiogram regarding this consciousness, but I took 23 different evaluation sheets, and from the evaluation sheets I looked at one or sometimes 2 or 3 questions. Okay, so then we will go through these questions, and it's not that I gave a grade. I will just do like an exposure on indicators of how I would answer to the question on the character of Albert Schweitzer. Okay, so first I would like to start to present the consciousness. So he was a German-born French theologian, organist, a philosopher, a physician, a missionary, and a peacekeeper. So when I say he was a German-born French, he was born in Alsace. Alsace is the region very close to where we live here in the Black Forest. Today it's France, but at the time that he was born in 1875, it was German. So the Alsace region has this characteristic that sometimes it was German and sometimes it was French, depending which nation won the war, because there were constant conflicts. The people from Alsace were French or German. Okay, so he entered his intensive theological studies in 1893. So here you see a slide of Strasbourg of that epoch. You see the university on the left side. So it's the old postcard which I found in the internet from Strasbourg. No, I found it here in this magazine. Okay, and then he also had a doctorate in philosophy in 1899 with a dissertation on religious philosophy of Kant. He received also his licentiate in theology in 1900. He began also preaching, so he was a pastor, a Lutheran pastor, in St. Nicholas Church in Strasbourg in 1899. And then he felt the need to study also medicine. So he started to study medicine in 1905 when he was 30 years old already. And then he was obtaining his degree as a medical doctor in 1913. And I would say at that time, his real core of his praxis started, because then in 1930, having obtained the medical doctor degree, he went to Africa and he founded their hospital. Okay, so here you can see Albert Schweitzer Hospital in Lambarene. This is not in 1930. Yes, go ahead.
May I ask the picture on the slide before?
Yeah.
On the right picture, where is he? Or is that his family? And he is on the photo?
I would like to come back to this. These are volunteers. Yes, I can say it now.
Okay.
I would like to afterwards. I would like to come back to this aspect. These are volunteers, which he engaged in order to help him to sustain the hospital. So these are volunteers in Strasbourg and the whole Alsace region. So you will see, you will not find him here on this picture. Okay, so upside, on this upper picture, he's not there, and below, I think he's there, or some people at Africa. Okay, so I would like to talk about volunteering system and how he supported this volunteering system and how he was a leader of a lot of, he could engage people very, very fast. Okay, so sorry that I did not explain that before. Okay. So this was his Strasbourg time. I did this link also because we will have an event in Strasbourg this year, 2018, November. So we will see, we will also talk about the hypothesis that he could be a helper, maybe, as extra-physical consciousness regarding this event, regarding pacifismology and this region and so on. So here you can see him already as an old man in his hospital at Lambarena, which is today Gabon, but at the time, 1913, when he went there, it was a French colony. Okay, people, if you have any doubts, you can interrupt any time. Okay, and we will talk about your doubts. Okay, or your comments, whatever. And he was there. He went there together with his wife, who was a nurse. She wanted to be a nurse. Once he wanted to become a doctor, a medical doctor, in order to have a hospital. So then she engaged in being a nurse. She got her nursing training. So Helene Breslau, his wife, and he first, they ran this hospital at the mission station, Lambarene in Gabon. So he went there also as a pastor. And his effort became an example to others. So today, if people know about Albert Schweitzer, a lot of people know about this life work where he dedicated himself in this hospital. So this is where he got very famous from. And in 1917, only 4 years after starting to build up this hospital, and when I say build up, it's physically building up with their hands, with people together and constructing, I think, the hospital. He and his wife were sent to a French internment camp as prisoners of war. As you know, 1914, Germany started the First World War. And then French people who were from Alsace, German-born people from Alsace were considered prisoners at Germans and came to prisoner camp, a French prisoner camp. And they were released only in 1918. It took another 5 years for Dr. Schweitzer to be able to go back to Africa, to the hospital. And you know how nature is. In 5 years, I think Brazil would be the same. you don't have a camp anymore. You don't have the hospital. The nature just goes over. So they had to start from scratch. And something happened also. His wife, during this imprisonment, she got very ill. So she could not anymore be so long with him in Africa. So from that point on, they had a very they had a relationship which was characterized by a lot of absence. Okay, because she had to stay in Europe because of her health a lot of times. You can see here Albert Schweitzer as a younger man. He was a very gifted musician and a good interpreter of Bach. He even wrote a biography of Bach. And he gave numerous organ concerts in Europe and the whole world in order to finance the hospital in Africa too. So Schweitzer, he always said that his first part of the life, until 30 years old, he wanted to dedicate himself to his music and to his philosophical studies. He very much liked Kant, so he developed his philosophies also with a lot of influence of this German thinker. And So he had a big connection with music, with Bach, and he also wrote not only a biography about Bach, but also a book on interpretation of Bach music's composition, and also a book about organ building. So he was a builder of organs also. In 1952, he was awarded with the Nobel Peace Prize for the work of his life at the hospital in tropical Africa. Since we have very short time, I don't want to show this small movie now, where you can see him coming to Oslo 2 years later. He did not go to Oslo in 52 because he considered he could not go away from the hospital at that time. So only 2 years later, he went to Oslo to receive his award. Okay, so this movie, if you want to see it afterwards, you have the link with the presentation. Albert Schweitzer developed a very particular philosophy, which he called reverence for life. So this was his ethical basis of his whole work, which was very practical for 50 years. And he said that he discovered this philosophy when he was at Lambarene. There were a lot of transport was done by boat on the big rivers. It was called, one of the big rivers was called Ogove. And he had a very strong connection to nature since he was a kid. And at that day, he were at one boat, at a canoe, and going along the Ogove River. And there he said that he got this big intuition, like in blog, this philosophy of reverence for life. So the German original, because he was thinking and writing in German also, when he developed this philosophy, is another name. It's Ehrfurcht vor dem Leben. So Ehrfurcht is not quite reverence. It's like the top of reverence if you pick the connotation of German, okay? So it's not quite adequate, this translation, but I think there's not a better translation for this name. So he was overwhelmed by this nature force from Africa, where he then was inspired with this philosophy. And he did a synthesis. I mean, I have a book here. You can see several books here behind me. And one book is just to explain what is the reverence for life, this philosophy. It's very interesting. He picks a lot of thoughts of Kant, of the ethics of Kant, but he constructs another structure of his own philosophy. So he did a synthesis of his philosophy, and this is this phrase, this sentence: I'm life that wills to live in the midst of life that means to live. So this was his philosophy, and he tried to put in practice what he was thinking, okay? So here we have his family. Helene Breslau, his wife, she died before him, so he was a widower. And then we can see also Rena, his daughter. He had one daughter with Helene Breslau, okay? Here he speaks in 1957 to the world. It was a radio speech that he gave in order to warn against nuclear tests and the dangers from radioactive fallouts. So at that time he was quite famous with the Peace Nobel Prize in 52. He already was famous, but other things we will talk about afterwards already made him more famous also. So his positionings and how he was talking to the rulers of of this intraphysical world with open letters and about peace and so on. So for me, to start to study the consciousness is this aspect of peacekeeping. Okay, so this, I consider this consciousness a peacekeeper, a very mature peacekeeper with his own characteristics. And now we will go into a little bit to the characteristic, but before that, I just wanted to tell you here what someone else said about him. So Dag Hammarskjöld, maybe you are familiar with Dag Hammarskjöld. Dag Hammarskjöld was the second chief secretary of the UN, and he said about Albert Schweitzer, and I took it from this book, you can see that in the reference afterwards. The two ideals which marked my world as a child are in total harmony and adapted to the demands of this current world, are reflected in the ethics of Albert Schweitzer. So this is my translation from German to English, because I have only the English, only the German book where he was talking about Albert Schweitzer. Okay, so Dag Hammarskjöld said that about Albert Schweitzer. Now we want to go into the conscientiometric analysis. Do you have any questions, any doubts about his life until now? Because from now I will just take some aspects out of his characteristics, and then through facts of his life I will talk about my opinion, what kind of grade or what kind of how developed he had this characteristic. No, if you don't have any questions, I will go ahead. So I took the conscientiogram and I did the first 10 pages, which are considered the Soma, which are regarding the Soma. Okay, so I took the 10 first sheets of evaluation, which are regarding the Soma. But since we have not so much time, maybe we will not look at all so in detail. Okay. And so I took always from the 20 questions of one sheet, I took one question, okay, the Soma. So here you can see at the evaluation sheet number 1, intrasomaticity, it's the intraphysical consciousness and Soma. The question would be an intraphysical consciousness that always employs the Soma correctly with cosmoethics in intraphysical life. Normally, when you're on the 20th question and you can consider that you have the affirmation that you have a high score, you can just see that the other 19 questions before, they are more ascending. So this is why I took this 20th question here. So I consider that he had 90 years of a very productive life. And that he employed the Soma in a correct way with cosmoethics. We will afterwards come to other aspects of the Soma. And not only that he employed his own Soma in a cosmoethical way, as he was very motivated to help as a medical doctor, he wanted also that other consciousness have a healthy Soma. So he dedicated very much time of his life to illnesses and to cure illnesses. Okay, so I think that he would deserve a very high score on this question. Okay. Then we go to the evaluation sheet number 2, hereditariness, paragenetics and genetics. In order to do a study of paragenetics, you have to look at other lives of this consciousness. And this is a very difficult part, okay? So I could not say that I did that. I had no means to do that. So I took one question which I think through hypothesis I could give some facts or parafacts. Okay, so what is the extent of your probable recent intermissive course according to your innate ideas and lucid self retrocognitions, frankly remembered or wholly unconscious? In this aspect, I think some innate ideas he had that he describes in his autobiography could be considered as indicators that he had a good preparation before he came to this life. So, for example, already as a kid, he had a very high level of ethical thinking regards to suffering of consciousness, of all consciousnesses. So he, for example, he was always very sad when he saw that other kids might harm animals, or even adults harming animals. So he has long passages in his autobiography talking about this issue. So this was a very high value for him. So he does not speak in his autobiography about retrocognitions, but several ideas, innate ideas that he had as a kid already, and then also in teenager life and afterwards, would, for me, point that he has a very good preparation. I don't know if we can call it intermissive course for that life. Paragenetics also and genetics you can compare the higher the maturity is of the evolutionary level of the consciousness, the more the paragenetics goes over the genetics. So if we look at his family in terms of genetics, for example, illnesses and so on, he for sure has a better paragenetic, which came because he was practically not ill during his whole life, and he could work until his 90s in a very productive way. This was not the case of his parents. His father was also got old, so you can say he had a good genetic, but he was ill, and then he recovered from his illness and so on. And his mother, she died in a type of macro-pica in an accident involving horses. Okay, so we go to the next one, which is the evaluation sheet number 3, and the minorityness, the child intraphysical consciousness. How do you classify your consciential basement? Was it an enriching incipit? Or, I just cannot read it here. Just give me 1 minute. Okay. Was it an enriching incipit or traumatic infantile period? Now we can talk a little bit about his childhood, which is very interesting also. As a small kid, he was a dreamer. He was living in the woods. He was born in a small village at the Alsace. I did some field research there at the house where he was born, and then afterwards at a house that he bought in Günzbach, also in the Alsace region, after winning the Goethe Prize in Frankfurt in 1927. He bought that house from that money that he received. So he was a dreamer. He was very much enjoying his freedom in the nature. So he was not such a good scholar because he was dreaming all the time. And he had a very big problem since he was the son of the church pastor, of the Lutheran priest in the village. other friends, other students, other boys would not see him as equal. They sometimes they said that he's on a higher level in society, and this is why they would not accept him as equal. Okay, so for example, he tells in his autobiography about a fact that not one of his colleagues in school had a winter coat, and his parents at that time could not buy a coat. You had to go to make a coat for you. So his parents saved a lot of money in order to get him a winter coat, to make him a winter coat. And he did not want to use this winter coat because all the other boys did not have one. So he was beaten up a lot of times because he was refusing to use this winter coat, because he wanted to be totally equal with them. He also would not wear his leather shoes during the week because all the other boys could only use their leather shoes on Sunday for church, but during the week they had to use the wooden shoes. So he wanted not to stand out. This was a concept that he had since the beginning. So he was struggling with that. Then there was one incident in childhood that he also explains, where he measured his strength, his physical strength, with another boy or with other boys. So he said that he liked that. So there was some things that indicate that he still has some issues with bellicism or aggressivity. And he also said that in his childhood, he had to take a lot of pay a lot of attention to his temper, that he was very like a violent temper. In German you say jähzornig. So I looked up the term. Sometimes they say it's violent temper, it's aggressive temper. So he said that he already at childhood he saw that he had this more destructive temper, but that he did not want that the temper hurts other people. So this was a conflict for him since childhood. Later in time, people who worked with him and also people who knew him a little bit better, they also confirmed that he sometimes had a temper. Okay, so here we have a trait which could show that he has some bellicist issue in order to be today a peacekeeper, a so famous peacekeeper. Normally you have on your evolutionary path, you have bellicist past also, even if it's a remote past, but you're coming from bellicism in some point of evolution, and then you will struggle, and then you will work for pacifism. Okay, so this is one of the theories that we develop at Conscientiometric, which is the specialty Syriaxology. Okay, so let's go to the next one, the evaluation sheet number 4, sexuality, intraphysical consciousness, soma, and sex. I took here one question. Naturally, it's very difficult to talk about sexuality, about some personality from 100 years ago or so, and you don't have facts in order to know. So what are your mature qualities within maternity? I took this one. Paternity and the implications of this in your healthy sexual life. Here I can only say he had one wife. I think they worked like an evolutionary duo. They were partners. Since she has had a weak health since imprisonment in 1917, they had to stay apart a long time. And then they had only one daughter together. Okay, so here I cannot say too much about maternity, paternity. I have one comment from Rena, his daughter, who said that she suffered because of the absence, of the long absences of her father. So sometimes he would stay 1 or 2 years in Africa and would not see his growing child. Okay, so I think this is an aspect that you can consider if he is so long absent and his wife is raising the child alone on another continent. I think you could not affirm that he had a healthy sexual life because of the not high frequency of the sexual life. Okay. Now I go to evaluation sheet number 5, youth. So the young intraphysical consciousness. I took here the 2 questions. What are your personal lack of reflections, the hierarchy of your existential interest, your preferences and your choices? And number 100, an intraphysical consciousness who seriously applied himself to a well-adjusted youth as a preparation for his own existential program. So this decision to dedicate his life until age 30 to arts and theology and his other philosophical interests, and then to qualify himself for years in order to start to work as a medical doctor. He said he wanted to serve the humanity in a more direct way because he saw so much suffering in the colonies, and he felt that this responsibility, and he describes this responsibility in his books, in his reverence of life ethics, that each man has a responsibility to make something good, to serve others, if he is in good condition. So the person who has a good condition, he has the responsibility to help those consciousness who are in a worse condition. So this is a concept or an ethical attitude that he, in practice, during his whole life, showed through his work. Then we have evaluation sheet number 6, psychomotricity, neurons and muscle mass. Okay, here we have a small mistake here, muscle. An intraphysical consciousness. Sorry, I'm here on the wrong one. What is the level of your global? I just got lost here. What is the level of your global equilibrium experiencing with your head, your ideas, your energies, your beat sets, and the subcerebral aggressiveness? Okay, here we go back to this fact that he was considering in his youth when he was fighting, measuring his strength of his body with others. So there was some subcerebral aggressiveness. Then also his temper, that he said that he had to always re-educate his aggressiveness also through life. So he's very open when he talks about that. Evaluation sheet number 7, scholarity. The question I picked was, what have been your choices with regard to the courses taken and given, diplomas, works, titles, and prizes award? Okay, here he had a licentiate in theology. So he was a pastor in Strasbourg first, and afterwards he also in Lamborghini. He was a pastor, but then the church, the Lutheran church, they considered that his speeches were too liberate, and so they forbid him to preach. So he could only work as a doctor, which was okay for him also. Okay, but for a long time he was also a pastor. Then he had a doctor in philosophy and then a doctor in medicine. Then he was the Nobel Peace Prize winner. But I consider also here that he was a big autodidact. So a lot of things he learned without a teacher. For example, constructing. He said that half of his life, maybe he was more like a constructor, an engineer, to construct things in Lambarene. So he knew all this, how to say, handcraft or art, or what you have to do with the hand, you know, to put the statics and everything in order to construct the barracks and the houses there. Then we have the evaluation sheet number 8, kinship, intraphysical consciousness and family. What is the evolutionary level of your awareness regarding your family, love, patience, maturity, and the fraternal adaptation to the intraphysical society to which you belong? So the first part, I think we already talked about that, family, patience, maturity. So he was he was an absent father and an absent husband also. But then he dedicated so much of his life to the needy or the poor persons, especially in Africa. Okay, so here we also have a hypothesis that he, in former lives, he had lives maybe where he was harming people or not helping people in evolution, maybe together in Africa. And then he had to go back and to do this part of its recomposition phase. If you go through the evolutionary levels, you have this phase of recomposition. So I consider that this 50 years as a doctor in Lambarene was in order to do this part of recomposition with these consciousness, hundreds and thousands of consciousness. Now we go to evaluation sheet number 9, coexistentiality, cosmoethical links. An intraphysical consciousness who lives a constructive cosmoethical link without divorce. We could say so. So he had no divorce. He was together with his wife until the end. Okay. Evaluation sheet number 10, longevity, old age. So what is the balance of your holokarmic account in your old age and the presumable level of your upcoming post-desomatic period? I consider from the pictures which I saw in different books and internet and in the museum where I went, the 2 museums where I went, that he had a very big presential strength at the end of his life. I cannot sense the same presential strength at the beginning of his life or in the middle of his life. So for me, it's like that it was a growing development of authority, moral authority in the peacekeeping process, but also in the recomposition of things, and that he was in big steps going towards the liberation phase. So for me, it is this old phase, this when he was between 80 and 90. And if you look at his biography, you will see this is also the time he died in 65, but like in 52 he won the Nobel Prize, and then he did those interviews, and then he sent letters to the presidents and so on. So I think he gained a lot of functional helpers also, like a bigger team in this peacekeeping work. So for me, it's like the last 10 to 12 years where he had more strength. Okay, and I would like to do an analogy. I sensed this also in the last 3 to 4 years at Valdoviera. So I knew Valdoviera from the 96 on, and I think he had a stable growth, but in this last 3 to 2.5, 3 years, I sensed that his presential strength, energetic presential strength, even with the weaker body, was very big, much bigger than like 5 years ago. So this is the same analogy I do with Albert Schweitzer. I can be wrong, okay? I had some paraperception. So go ahead, yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you think this strength has something to do with completism? Maybe
Yes.
because he completed his existential programming and then he gained like more energetic strength because of that?
Yes, I guess that with this work, Beatrice, at hospital in Lambarene, he completed a phase of recomposition, which was like the first proexis, the first part of his existential program. And sometimes you gain a plus, a surplus, like a morexis, but not a morexis because of inferiority, but a morexis because you still have something left. You can still an upgrade, okay? Like a maximorexis, maybe.
Exactly.
Okay, and then he had
a macrosoma.
Yes, I work with this hypothesis that he had a macrosoma, and there are a lot of indicators in his life. Other doctors talking about that, for example. In the first years, he worked as a medical doctor in Lambarene, and then during the World Wars, the medicine would not arrive and so on because he worked during the two World Wars there, yeah. And then they had very, precario, very circumstances which are very poor. So sometimes he had to perform surgeries, Beatrice, which were highly risky to the person to get an infection because they did not have the whole tooling. And other doctors said that when he performed these surgeries, which are highly risky and they did not have all the things, they always had no problem. They had no problem with it. So afterwards, I go inside of a bioenergetic aspect of his analysis, and I think he was working with his bioenergies in such a healthy way that no somatic infection would go. So the other doctors sometimes say that it was like a miracle that nothing happened when he was doing very difficult surgeries. Yeah,
that's remarkable. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, so I think that he had a macrosoma. To have a macrosoma needs that you have to be been a completist in the life before. So maybe he already prepared something. I don't know what is the sequence of his different retro lives, but I think that he had a macrosoma. Yes. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. So about the balance, I think we talked about the balance of what is the balance of your homosomatic, yeah? Okay. Yes, here I would like to say also something. Sometimes journalists, if you're so famous as Albert Schweitzer was at the last time of his life after winning the World Peace Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, you got different opinions, people who envy you and other people who admire you. And so the journalists, they reflect all these kind of visions. So some journalists, they spoke in an ironical way, or they wrote in an ironical way, and they said that he was the conscious of the world. And others said he was the conscious of the world and admired him for him. So this was in his last phase as a big peacekeeper, okay? So I think he was with a very good extraphysical team at that time already. Bioenergetics. Now now we had this 10 questions of Soma, and now we go a little bit into bioenergetics. So here I took vitality, abdominal subbrain. What is the degree of your unbreakable will, of your discernment, and of the practical application of your umbilical chakra? What is the weight of your subthoughts, the units of measure of the abdominal subbrain? I took this question and this evaluation sheet, number 13, because I personally have a problem with the umbilical chakra. So I thought, oh, I want to see in that man what is the difference, and to evaluate another consciousness on that. So I talked a little bit about his imprisonment in the First World War, and then he decided this was not an easy decision to decide to get back to Africa without his wife, knowing that his wife is ill or is not healthy. And so I think this putting the work, the service to others above anything else shows that he had really a strong will. And so he reconstructed everything from scratch. At that point, some other doctors, medical doctors from the Alsace who knew him, they helped him there to build this second version of the hospital. So a little bit more professional, and he could work with other medical doctors there. So he built a team. Yeah. But I think here you can see unbreakable will. It has a lot to do with the umbilical chakra, because sometimes you have a lot of good theoretical concepts, ethics, but you cannot put it in practice. So if you don't have a strong will, and this has a lot to do, I think, to put something in practice in intraphysical life, has to do with the unblocked umbilical chakra. And so I would say that he has he had this umbilical chakra unblocked, and that he knew how to work with this strength. Okay. The weight of your subthoughts, I cannot find indicators of subthoughts. So if you read his Reverence for Life, the texts, the ethics, you will see that he has a very mature structure of thinking, and very easy to follow. It's so for lay people who are not philosophers or philosophy students, they can easily understand his philosophy. Normally I have problem to study philosophy like Kant or other big philosophers. For example, Adorno, I could not read. I could not understand anything from Adorno. Kant, I get something, understand, but normally I take the commentaries, the comments from other philosophers who try to translate to normal people, not philosophers, the philosophy. With Albert Schweitzer, you don't have this problem. When you read his philosophy, you understand. So he wrote it in a way that everyone can understand, and I like that very much. Number 16, sanity, homeostasis, and the intraphysical consciousness. So still bioenergetics. How do you react to the condition of homo amicus, the generous intraphysical consciousness, in contrast to homo hostilis, the intraphysical intruder? So here I wanted to go back to the volunteering. So you saw the Strasbourg volunteers on one of the first slides, right? And he had a lot of friends. And after his day work at Lambarene Hospital, he normally sat down at his desk in his room, and then he wrote letters to his friends all over the world. So he had correspondence with dozens or hundreds of different persons, not so famous ones and famous ones. So this was very interesting, and for sure he also wrote his books in the evening. And then there's something which friends of him told the journalists and told the biographers. First of all, he said that he would not allow his friends to defend him. So if there was a journalist or some critics were done against him, or even false accusation were done, people invented something and so on, he would not allow that his friends defend him. So this was very interesting also. So I think this is an interesting aspect. And the friend said, this was the hardest thing about the friendship. He would not allow us to defend him. So this is, I think this is a very interesting trait that you can observe also. His whole philosophy was about reconciliation. And he took a very interesting thought of Kant's philosophy, where Kant talks about forgiveness. And Albert Schweitzer said that we should not even come to the point to think we have to forgive. We have to educate ourselves to understand that we will never be in a position to forgive because we are doing harm also. So the harm which is done with us is just a reflection of the harm that we are also doing to the outside world. And there are thousands of harms that you are doing. For example, in order to survive, you have to kill plants and animals and you eat them, okay? So he said, just for me to survive, I already invade the interests from other consciousnesses. So he had a very special point of view about forgiveness, and I would say today with the terms of conscientiology of the law of cause and effect, he would understand it intrinsically, but he just used other terms of it. So I think he would not show himself as a homo hostilis or an intraphysical intruder. I think he had more of a helper in his personality. Then we have number 18, acquisitiveness, self-attachment and self-detachment. I also took this because I thought that this was a very low-graded one in my self-conscientiogram. So I looked at this aspect of his life. What is the balance of your human life simultaneously within the unavoidable self-attachments and intelligent self-detachments? I think he was very good in renouncing. For example, he renounced a comfortable life of an academic or of an artist. He could also survive with his organ playing. He was a very famous organ player. He could survive by writing books also, but he wanted to dedicate his life to practice medicine for the poorest people. So I think in terms of self-detachment, he has a very high score. He would receive the highest score. Detoxicity, the energetic self-compensation, would be here then 318, an intraphysical consciousness who correctly applies energetic and multidimensional para-hygiene to itself. So I think that his personal holocene was so healthy that he also had like an aura of healthy bioenergies, which he could use to get along with the helpers when performing surgeries. Or he was a big mediator also when the African people with a totally different mindset came with their values and so on, and he was educating them and explaining what he thinks. So he had a very interesting, very interesting experience. He had an assistant. He was called Joseph. He was an African assistant. So Joseph was from that region, and he started as like an assistant just for cooking and so on. But then he always was like with time a medical assistant. So he would like be a nurse or something like that. And then he was also helping him in constructing the houses, okay? So when Dr. Schweitzer was there, and there were a lot of these workers were there, the African workers, then always Dr. Schweitzer said, if we put a column, like the wooden column, into the ground, so you have to do a hole and then you put it down into the ground. Before that, you have to go into this hole and to see if there is not any animal, like even if it's an ant, you have to take it out, okay, and then only put the column. And then all the Africans, they laughed so much. And they said, he is totally crazy, this doctor, and so on. So they would wait until he's away, and then they put the column without looking if there's an end or so, okay? But then Joseph, he was his assistant. He had learned through years and years this ethical attitude of Dr. Schweitzer. He would not allow that anyone put a column into the hole without looking if there's an end. So this is very interesting. If you see, he was like spreading his philosophy in a very practical way. And also I have one book here where I think it's very interesting. Just a moment, I take it here. Can you see here Dr. Schweitzer with the cat? Yeah, this is the book, A Reverence for Animals. Like, you should respect also animals, okay? So this cat he had, okay, sometimes she just would lie, he was riding in the evening, and then she wanted to lie down. And sometimes he rode, and then and then sometimes he read, and then she just slept on his right hand, okay? So he said this was a big conflict because he didn't want to wake up the cat, so he started to learn to write with the left hand also, okay? Other people, when they came to Lambarene, and you had to take the river with the canoes, and after a long journey in the hot summer and so on, they stopped at the Lambarene River, and they had to go out, and then had to get their luggage out and go away until the houses. So sometimes there was crossing a goose family the way. So everyone had to stop and put the luggage down until the goose family, until the geese were with all the small ones could cross first because they were crossing, okay, and then the visitors could go there. So this was related and also filmed, very, very interesting. Let's go to the next one, anteriority, presomatic consciousness, 419. It's the second part of this. How many hours a week you think about others with the intention of helping them? I think here we have a high score on this one. So he had his very intense routine at the hospital. In the morning, he woke up very early, and he had his routine and only stopped when the sun went down. So he had a long day, and in the night he was writing correspondence and also his books, okay? So I think he thought constantly about others. 22, potentiality, courage of the consciousness. This is also something I looked at. I looked at my score, and I looked at him, and I saw a big difference. Have you discovered, still during useful phase in your life, the use of justified audacity in your resolutions? He had a strong positioning for peace, for humanity. So he had strong values and principles. He imposed those principles first on him, and also on people who lived with him. But on people who lived with him, he also had this educator factor. He was like a professor or like a preceptor, like a tutor to other people. So normally people who worked with him for a long time, they spoke very well of him and of this education process that happened with them through working with them. So a lot of people, dozens of nurses, dozens of medical doctors left a career in France and Germany in order to sustain with him the hospital in Lambarene. And if you see today, it's still there, the Lambarene hospital. So you can see that if it were not constructed in a very ethical and healthy way, it would not have overlived all these years in 65. So the fact that this Lambarene hospital, today a lot more qualified and so on, bigger, is still there, I think there was a solid foundation, okay? So he was very courageous when he was, for example, addressing the two presidents with the biggest power in the world, was Khrushchev and Kennedy. In 62, he wrote open letters to those presidents in order to stop nuclear tests and so on. So this was when a lot of journalists came over him, and a lot of bellicist people would like to see him away from this conversation and taking influence. It's very important to understand that he did not want to involve himself into this. So I have one book here from Mormon Cousin. You can see it here behind me. It's called Albert Schweitzer, Mission, Healing, and Peace. And he tells in this book exactly how he and other people visited him and in letters tried to convince him to get into this debate of nuclear tests and so on, and that he should speak up. Because he first did not want to be involved, because he knew that his voice, that he did not want to join politics or be a politician like this, or having a position. But once he acknowledged that he has this responsibility, and this was a long process, so then he was very courageous in everything what he said. And only looking at the texts from journalists and other criticism he received, I think you can see how important his speaking up was also. So I consider this part of peacekeeping and speaking up for the world public, practically in 57, from 57 on. I consider this the core of his second part of the praxis. Number 25, utility, intraphysical consciousness and free time. What is the extent of your free time, of your leisure hours, and the fact that the consciousness needs to come before work? What evolutionary benefits have you been obtaining with the intelligent utilization of your time? He once said that he would like to play the organ and be always in nature and so on. So if he had free time or on his trips, he would always try to do that. But his work came in first place. Evaluation sheet number 27, influentiality, satellite intraphysical consciousness. The question is, what is your personal autonomy in relation to what the most fanatizing social clique thinks? Here I picked this question because I think we have to consider also that he was a religious person. So from the conscientiology point of view, religion is a dogma. He had issues with the church institution, but then he, for example, he wrote a book about life of Jesus before 19. So I think it was his work in order to get a degree in theology. So here you can see this posture also of fanatism, religion, and so on. But I could not see any fact in his life where religion or a irrational attitude would be taken by him because of religious beliefs or so on. So he was a very rational, mental, somatic person, but a very deep believer, okay, so of Christianity. So he has this part also. So about influence, for sure, he still nurtured the thought scenes of religion and the thought scenes of believing also, okay? Then we have the ego-karmality, 598. What is the evolutionary structure of your personal work, your scope, duration, and the results for this current critical human existence? I think here we can see that he was a good example for a lot of people. Even today is a good example. So he wrote a lot of books, then his work in the hospital, his peacekeeping work. I think this is what you can see here, that is very small score on egoism. And then I like very much his poster regarding volunteering. So he writes in his autobiography that from the beginning on, when he was a young man, he always incentivized people to volunteer. He said that everyone should, if you have a life which allows you to have some free hours, in these free hours you should be a volunteer. A volunteer of anything what you can do, even if it's a small thing like going to all elderly people and to visit them. Everyone has qualities and traits that he can use in order to assist on his level. So he always said to the people that volunteering is very important for the person. So I think this is very interesting, because since conscientiology is all volunteer based, I think this is a very nice synchronicity. What is the nature of your individuality itself? Free or dependent, pacific or hostile, balanced or immature? Well, we have this religious aspect, that he was a religious person. But even being religious, I think he was very free in his thinking. And in his philosophy, if you take his books or his autobiography, you will see that he was a very independent and a pacific, balanced and mature thinker. We have here the rationality also, the evaluation sheet number 37, imperturbability. How much have refrainment, mishaps, traumas been worth to you in order to set your level of internal anchorage in your condition of intraphysical consciousness? Do you control your consciential energies? He had his own model or paradigm to explain the world. So even inconsistencies which we have in intraphysical life, where sometimes people think, oh no, I'm so unfortunate because something happened to me, he always found some explanation about that. So I think when he talks about life, suffering, evolution and culture, he developed a very interesting explanation model for evolutionary, for evolutionary development. So I think he had a very big internal anchorage of what we call in pacifismology like a big inner peace, inner pacification. Okay. I think I have 5 more others here, but I just want to pick one because we are very short in time. Since we only started half an hour late, I just thought about 1.5 hours normally we have, but since we are late, 1.5 hours, if this is okay, Regina, with you, I do another 3 or 4 minutes, and then we go into the debate for half an hour. Is that okay? Can you give me a sign, Regina, if this is okay? Okay, good. So the next one is the maxi consensus, leading edge. I want to go to the leadership. Yes, because this was something which I wanted to analyze a little bit deeper. Relationship number 41, authority, power of conduction. How much is your cosmoethical code of conduct worth? How do you coexist with leadership, be it scientific, religious, entrepreneurial, marginal, or of other categories? I already explained about how he was like a moral authority speaking about peace, and how he addressed to the leaders of the world. Yeah. So I think he was a kind of leader. He was an old-fashioned leader. He was the boss at Lambarenes, so people would not do something without consulting him. So he was like at that time you had this kind of leadership. But then he was also very fraternal. So if you go to the next one, it was still authority, power of conductions. The question is, what is the dimension of your militant public spirit when placed under the ephemeral lights on the stage of human life? What is your contribution to the improvement of the exercise of authority on earth? I think he showed the earth what is moral authority through a practical life of assistance. And now the last one I have here, also leadership, authority, 817. What is the intensity of your presence regarding the qualification of personal dynamics in the frank exercise of human authority? Yeah, for me this is like a very, very high score. So this kind of leadership, which Albert Schweitzer had, influencing so many people at that time, at his time, during his life, but only afterwards, I think is very outstanding. And this is why I picked this consciousness in order to study. And I picked it for other reasons also. I have a great affinity with this consciousness. I admire a lot the personal traits of this consciousness. I think I had some contact with the extraphysical consciousness, and since he lived very close to where I was born and where I'm living today, I think it's also a very regional affinity that I have with him. Okay, guys, I have here still the references. You will see them when we get back to when you got the presentation in PDF. And I would now stop the presentation. Thank you for your patience. I think it was technical. It was a long presentation, but I hope that you could have some association of the ideas or some questions or some doubts, which could bring us into a debate on this consciousness.
Yes, I would like to ask you a question. Could you identify his mega strong trait, or the strong trait that was more remarkable, or maybe the one that took him to the intermissive course?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think it's mega fraternity. Mega fraternity. And I say that because of his deep empathy with all consciousnesses. Since childhood, he had that. And this guided like his proexis. So I would say that mega fraternity was his mega strong trait. Yeah, I think it is very close to a very high level through this. I think that he built this fraternity up in a lot of lives through Takon, through consolation tasks in religion. This is why you can see still in that life of Albert Schweitzer a religious connotation, and he went as a missionary to the colonies. Okay, but I think mega fraternity is like the guiding line which penetrates all his acts and action. But I can be wrong. I did not the whole conscientiogram, but it would be my guess.
No, but it seems like it was something that came naturally from everything, from all the facts that you told us about his life. Maybe.
Good question. I liked it. I'd never thought about his mega strength rate, but at the moment that you asked, came to my mind that
it was very clear then. It was something that right.
Someone else would like to. We can also talk about one or other aspects. I read so much biographies and his autobiography. So if you want to just chat about his life or know more facts.
There is one other thing that I've been thinking as you started presenting. That aspect that you said about aggressiveness that he manifested in the early years mainly.
Yes.
it seems like that comes from a past, maybe a distant past, other lives.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe as a warrior or something.
Yes.
So it manifested, but somehow it's something that gave him the strength, you know. His aggressiveness also has a strength in it when you take the bellicism. So yeah, so I don't know, maybe it's a clue about his previous, about his background. Right?
Yes.
Because it seems contradictory that he was a Nobel Prize. He had a Nobel Prize for peace, but at the same time he had this aggressiveness. But it's part of the paradox of evolution.
Yeah, it seems to be a paradoxon. But if you study more the Syriaxology, we have the hypothesis in Syriaxology that if you are very much into one issue like peacekeeping, because you have big foot in the past of bellicism, okay? So, and since the temper, you don't change your temper so fast. So your temperament is something you very slowly change through evolution, okay? So this is why he still had to struggle with this aggressive temper, through his whole life, okay? Because there are people who say that he was sometimes like he had this temper, okay? Even as an adult, okay? He was like a leader who was fraternal, but also very, very firm. And sometimes he had these reactions, which is, like you said, some aggressiveness, which can be also be positive. But I think normally aggressiveness is we have more the connotation of a bad thing, okay?
But yes, in the qualification, I would say that we need to qualify all the traits, but it's important. It's the basis, because he lived in a very in an environment that was against what he had to do, and it was difficult. So imagine in that context, if you don't have a strong personality, you don't survive.
Yes, you don't survive. You're right. Yeah. So he had this firmness in his positioning, very firm. And this is why I did this umbilical chakra connection. In order to be that firm, you have to have an unblocked umbilical chakra. In my, I think, bioenergetically speaking, this is the part of the bioenergy of the chakras where you have been have a potent umbilical chakra in a good sense. Yeah.
It has to do with doing and accomplishing.
Accomplishing. Yeah. Thank you, Beatrice, for your association of ideas. It's very rich.
No, thank you, because it was very interesting, that part of the umbilical chakra. It's full of thought. Yeah, that's why I love to study biographies, because it gives like something objective for you to start thinking and making hypotheses and linking one thing to the other. It's very rich.
Yeah. Do you study biographies of peacekeepers also, Beatrice?
I study one, nowadays I'm studying Jose Pedro Varela, which is an educator in my country. And he lived in the second part of the 19th century. And he was more, it has to do more with education and politics. He was interested in,
Very interesting. Okay. Well, now I also love to study biographies, and I think we can learn a lot with biography, because conscientiology is the study of consciousness. If you don't like biographies, well, how can we start to enrich our scope of thinking and so on, if we don't want to study biographies? Yeah. Very good.
You need examples and lots of comparing one thing to the other and map. It's incredible. And now with the consecutive personalities that are being identified, it's even richer, because we can think about what happens from one life to the other, and what changes and what doesn't. So you can see what is the essential
Yes.
that comes, that is with us in all the process.
Yes,
So it's
yes.
interesting.
I totally agree with you. I had the tendency, Beatrice, to study biographies of people that I have affinity, but and peacekeepers and so on. But then I started to work on an issue, narcissism and so on, and then I had to study biographies of ballicists, of warriors, of mega intruders. And then I said, oh, but I don't want to study this biography. But I saw it was very enriching also for me. It was harder for me. It was not like smooth. I did not have the same motivation. But you know what helped me so much is to see how different people think, even if they think totally different from me. But what is their explanation model on several things? So this flexibilized a lot my mindset, you know. So sometimes to take a biography of someone who thinks totally different from me, for me is a good strategy also.
Yeah, because you can put yourself in understand more about that person, and when you understand, you can develop the mega fraternity. It's a way to, because you have to build rapport with the person, you have to comprehend the person. If not, we are sending bad energies to them.
I did not get to this point of mega fraternity. I still was very much in conflict when I saw some of the thinkings of these ballicists, but I parts of their thinking, I saw that they are very close to my thinking. So I could identify some ballicist traits in me, which are very close to this kind of irrational behavior or thinking and so on. So this is very good, because then I don't have the distance anymore between this consciousness. But I cannot say that I developed maxi fraternity, because this would be for me a very high evolved sentiment. I don't have that. But studying biographies, I got into their structure of thinking, and at least for me, it's like one step towards the consciousness. For me, this is my limit. I cannot do more.
No, it's something distant, but we are on the way of starting developing something in that direction.
And you see affinities in some things, so you're closer to that consciousness. Yeah, someone else would like to bring a point or association of ideas or a thought to our debate.
I was wondering.
I have noticed a very close relationship with regarding the arts process, more specifically with Johann Sebastian Bach, because I have read his biography, and a lot of traits are very, very similar between Albert Schweitzer and Johann Sebastian Bach. For example, the question of aggressiveness, knowledge of theology, and so on, the question of self-learning, his emotional life, the way he behaved with his wife and so on. Found that very interesting.
Okay, and would you risk a hypothesis, Sergio, that maybe he was Johann Sebastian Bach, if not, if he was close to Johann Sebastian Bach during that life of Bach?
Given the facts, that wouldn't be absurd.
Okay.
I cannot say, but it's a very strong hypothesis.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah.
Actually, I would have to revisit Johann Sebastian Bach's biography, because I read it a long time ago, and then based on your presentation to draw a parallel between the two. But it's really impressive the way they functioned.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you, because it crossed my mind also when I heard his Bach music playing. You still have videos and audios and so on. And since he was such a he was like considered at that time the biggest, how do you say, the one who most understood from Bach. Yeah, okay. So he was like the reference for Bach. So there's something, but I could not say, because I did not study then biography of Bach. I went to his house in Germany here of Bach and so on. I sensed some energy, but I could not get any facts or parafacts in order to know to say this could be a hypothesis, this could be a indicator or not for this hypothesis. Yeah, maybe someone would like to do that in the future. I don't know. Thank you, Sergio.
Sure.
Regina, you wanted to say something?
I think what captured my attention the most was this fact. So it's okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was wondering about the topic of serving, because using this term of serving has often this more religious connotation, right? Okay, he was a religious person, and I'm wondering where is the, how can I say, the step ahead, if you can say so, between the religious connotation, serving people, and or the world or humanity, as you said, obviously, and really mega fraternity. In a way, I understand the argument you had regarding also respecting other consciousnesses like animals, for example. I was wondering about that, where we can, or if there is a need to draw such a line. And sometimes I was also wondering in, how can I say, we often admire people for their serving, for their willing to, for their, how can I say, sometimes a kind of need to give up their own needs, their own personality, their own family life. As we heard, he was an absent father and an absent husband and so on. Yeah. So I was wondering, where is this line where this is still in balance, and we can say it's mega fraternity and helper attitude, compared to the fact that there might be this group karmic account not too much being in balance, and also your ego karmic account in terms of maybe working too much, maybe not having a healthy sexuality, as you said, and so on, you know.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is a very big question, and I think from outside to judge something from another life for someone else, I think it's almost impossible. I think this is a very personal question for your personal situation, looking at your evolutionary situation, at your circumstances, at your possibilities, at your proexis, and so on. So I would not dare any hypothesis for Dr. Schweitzer regarding this. I don't know, but I think I think we will have this issue, this question, in a lot of, not only this life, but in a lot of lives which are to come. I think we will have this question. Maybe we still are not so free of ego karmic issues and group karmic issues, and sometimes we just need like a recomposition, like we have to recompose to gain strength, and then more forward we be more liberated. I think, I don't know. I think this balance is a very important issue that we have to address. Everyone of us has to address to find this balance. Yeah.
Mm.
But do you have any ideas? What would be an indicator? What could be the guideline?
No, not yet. I thought about also of Dhaka Maskelt. He was not married, so he also took back his own personal needs in a very strong way, at least what I saw. And I think there are a lot of other personalities that really serves humanity that we could admire and that can serve as a really great example for helping others, right? I don't know, there are a lot of people coming to my mind, but I don't know. I think in a way there is this aspect that is very rewarding, helping other people. I think that this is something that also gives you a kind of energetic, I don't know, resonance, feedback. And I think that this is something that really gives something back also to people that help others a lot. And the question, and I in some people, not some of the famous I meet now, but in other people, I saw that this could be a very difficult aspect, so that they are kind of that they could develop a kind of neediness for this energy that you can gain from helping others. Mm-hmm. And I think in that sense, it's not too healthy. So I think that this is something that everyone might need to keep an eye on, yes. Especially if we volunteer, if we're working, all of that. So to keep such a kind of balance for ourselves, and always to ask ourselves if there is still this balance. But I don't know how to. I do not have a criteria list of 10 things that I need to observe, something like that. No, I don't have yet. Yeah.
Thank you for bringing in this aspect. I think we have to really pay attention and figure out very personally how to do it. Yeah, I think there's no one rule for everyone.
No, don't think so too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also what I found interesting, what you were saying about the biographies of maybe not too specific personalities.
Yes.
What I thought also was that it also can help us to develop a kind of empathy for these. First of all, for ourselves, and also for the other consciousnesses. And sometimes it helps, I think, to understand why people are in this condition, or why they think what they think, or to see their psychological aspects, or maybe others, if you have the information about that. So I think this sometimes can help not to judge them, and to really be able to develop this existentiality, maybe I can say it that way. But I understand that this is really something that is not too easy to do in order to get in contact with this holothousin of bellicism, of aggressiveness, and all of that, what we in a way also might not consider as positive.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's a thing. And another thing that I was thinking about was the point of aggressiveness in his youth we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking that this is maybe more or less part of kind of, I don't know how to say, like our, how can I say, that we are in a way are a bit close to animals, as being in this animal body. So I think especially in the time when we are young, and maybe in this I don't know how to say, pubertät in German.
Or consciential basement, that would be the issue. The consciential basement. Or
so I think that this is a time where maybe this is very, very strong, this influence of this animal body, for example, and this is what animals do, right? Be in a kind of competitive mode with others and so on, and struggling with others and fighting and seeing how strong you are compared to the others and so on. So I'm not sure if this is not some part of the normal, how can I say, development in the human life, right?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I guess. And I think for a man, testosterone, if you have the hormones and so on, I think this is quite normal. Mm-hmm. Someone else would like to say something, to debate on one or another characteristic of this consciousness? If not, I would like to motivate you guys to study peacekeeper biographies, and if you want to do a presentation here at the college, Invisible College. Some meetings ago we were talking about that we might do a sequence of biography studies and presenting them to our colleagues. I studied more than one peacekeeper, and I have some presentations already done in different formats. And for me, it's very rewarding to study peacekeepers. So I always have to limit myself to not do only that, because it's so nice. It's a very gratifying task. It's totally different from structuring classes of conscientiology and do other research. So for me, it's like a hobby. It's like a leisure. So, yeah. What?
The bonbon.
The bonbon, yes, the sweet, the sweet, the cherry on the pie, yes. Mm-hmm. So I sense a lot of functional helpers when I work with peace studies, and I think I call them equipax, equipe of pax, ne? Pax is the Latin word of peace, yeah. So I think it's very rewarding to work with all issues of peace, peacekeeping, personalities, translating books which goes aligned with this issue. So if maybe you want to think for the future, I would be very interesting to see like biographies or presentations of other peacekeepers. Regina did that of Dag Hammarskjöld at the campus at Saquarema, the Peace Campus, in 2015, and that was very, very nice. And I think I was there, and I think it was had a very big repercussion in the audience. And even if it was a very small, she already had 20 minutes. It was a very summarized one. And she was kind of desperate because of the 20 minutes. Half of the thing was the translation. But then I think it's not the quantity, it's the quality. So even if you cannot do a whole study, like for example, I studied this consciousness since 2006, and I had opportunity to go to the houses where he lived and so on. I've not been at La Barrena. I've not been in Africa. So, but then sometimes just some hours a weekend. Sorry?
There's still time.
Yeah, there's still time. There's still time to go there. Yeah. But sometimes some hour, weekend or so, and you pick just a personality which you think you might have affinity. I have the hypothesis that some of these peacekeepers from last century, end of 19th century also, they are still at the extra-physical, and they are working as a helper, and then they are very close to conscientiological issues. So even if the person might have been in aristocracy like Berta von Suttner, or in religion like Albert Schweitzer, or in other areas. I think conscientiology is very attractive to a lot of people who had like completism in peacekeeping life, and now will have like an upgrade in his like an intermissive course for this specialty of pacifism. Because if we consider that the biggest project that we have on this planet or around this planet today is rebornization, and we look at the output that should come from rebornization in some hundreds of years, thousands of years, which is the world peace, the world state, I think we need specialists. And if we don't start with the peacekeepers who already did something, with whom will we start? Okay, so this is my personal hypothesis. I think we have a helpers team for peacekeeping, and I think it's very gratifying to work a little bit, and studying them is the I think is the shortest way to connect to these kind of holothasy. Okay, so I'm at the end.
Thank you very much. For me it was great. Yeah.
Okay, thank you guys also. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye. See you.
Bye. See you
Bye-bye.
around.
Next time. Thank you so much.
Ciao.